On tonight's summary of the Israel-Hamas War, day 295. Israel transmits to the U.S. a draft response in hostage negotiations, officially adding the new demands raised by Prime Minister Netanyahu. Israeli delegation leaders fear a collapse in the talks. Major IDF airstrike reported in a school in Deir el-Balah in the central parts of the Gaza Strip. The IDF states that the Hamas headquarters was operating from the compound. Palestinian sources state that it was a field hospital in that area. The IDF adjusts the designated humanitarian zones in the southern parts of Han Yunis, calling upon Palestinians to evacuate before an impeding IDF invasion in those neighborhoods. In the biggest escalation in northern Israel since the war began, Hezbollah missile targets a soccer field in Majd el-Shams, killing 12 Israeli teenagers. Hezbollah denies responsibility. The sides brace for possible spiral into full-scale war. Hello everyone, I'm Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute fellow at the University of California, Irvine, here bringing you the latest highlights from the Israel-Hamas War. It's currently the evening of July 27, 2024 in the United States, the morning of July 28, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, following Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's meeting with the U.S. leadership in the last several days, Israel has transmitted to the U.S. its official answer to Hamas's latest response in the hostage negotiations, which the U.S. in turn is supposed to give to the negotiators after it finalizes the back and forth with Israel. According to reports, however, the Israeli response repeats Netanyahu's previous public statements, adding the demands that the IDF will maintain its presence in the Netzarim corridor, i.e. that Palestinians traveling north in the Gaza Strip will have to go through IDF checkpoints, and that the IDF will maintain its presence along the Philadelphia line that is the border between Gaza and Egypt. Both things have previously been categorically rejected by Hamas. If this in fact is included in the Israeli response, this will be the first time that these terms are actually given as part of negotiations. Up until now, Netanyahu has raised them in public speeches and statements, however it has never been officially transmitted to the sides. These two demands, alongside several others, are newer clauses that the Prime Minister added after the initial deal was proposed and in theory agreed upon by Israel at the end of May. As a result, there was a lot of pessimism that was raised today within the Israeli negotiating teams, stating that the negotiating countries may not even want to deliver this answer to Hamas, since not only does this not constitute a step forward in negotiations, in fact it is a substantial step backwards in the negotiations and what has been agreed upon already. Relating to these reports, Hamas spokesperson Jihad Taha was also quoted in the Quds News Network today, saying that the group will not accept any retraction from what has already been agreed upon. Despite this, according to the latest reports, the Rome summit is due to take place either tomorrow or at the beginning of next week. Reportedly, this is going to be attended by the top negotiators, the CIA Director William Barnes, head of the Israeli Mossad Dedi Barnea, head of the Egyptian intelligence Abbas Kamel, and the Qatari Prime Minister Mohammed Athani. However, while this meeting has been scheduled, it remains to be seen how it actually develops. In addition to this, related to the hostage situation, I must add a correction to yesterday's summary that I published. I had stated in relation to the 5 bodies of hostages that were retrieved from the Gaza Strip that 4 of them were IDF soldiers and 1 was a civilian, all killed on October 7th. In fact, only 2 of those who were retrieved were IDF soldiers, 3 were civilians, all killed on October 7th and their bodies kidnapped back to the Gaza Strip. 2 of those civilians were engaged in civil defense during October 7th, and that is the reason that in some of the reports it was conflated, saying they were part of security forces, but in fact they were not IDF soldiers. In addition, I'd like to thank a friend of mine, who's also named Alon, for correcting this after my latest summary. Moving on to the Gaza Strip, only 2 reports coming out from the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. One report relates to a major airstrike that was carried out by the IDF in Deir el-Balah in the central parts of the Gaza Strip. The attack targeted the Hadija school in the western parts of the city, with the IDF stating that this facility was being used as a command center for Hamas in central Gaza. The IDF also stated that Hamas had a lot of operatives held up within this compound, was also engaged in weapons manufacturing, and that a lot of steps were taken to avoid civilian casualties. Palestinian sources in turn stated that the school was being used as a field hospital and a shelter for internally displaced peoples within the Gaza Strip, adding that at least 30 people were killed in this attack and over 100 were injured. In the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, in addition to ongoing fighting in Rafah and Han Yunis, and to that one must add also several substantial airstrikes were reported in Han Yunis today, killing 23 people, the IDF again published new adjustments to the humanitarian zones in Han Yunis, indicating an expansion of IDF activity towards the southern parts of the city. These are images that the IDF put out calling upon Palestinians in these southern neighborhoods to evacuate to other areas of the Al-Mawasi refugee camp. So again, the humanitarian zone in Han Yunis is being quote-unquote thinned, and other areas that were previously defined as humanitarian zones are now defined as active war zones. I remind everyone that several days after the previous adjustment that the IDF made to these different humanitarian zones in Han Yunis, it retrieved those 5 bodies from a tunnel in the previously designated humanitarian zone. Possibly that's what's going to happen now, possibly not. Either way, the IDF is indicating that it intends on invading these southern neighborhoods in Han Yunis. Regarding casualties, 1 IDF soldier was reported killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began to 329. The number of IDF soldiers injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began has been adjusted and is actually lowered in the latest reports of the IDF. It is now 2,156. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting that 83 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip in the past 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 39,258. 90,506 Palestinians are reported injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began, and I remind everyone that according to latest estimates, there are still between 7,000 and 10,000 Palestinians that are reportedly buried under the rubble and presumed dead. One report coming out from the West Bank in the last 24 hours, in an unusual scale attack, the Palestinian Red Crescent reported that 28 people were injured in an airstrike that was carried out in the Balata refugee camp near Nablus. I'll say that prior to this operation in Nablus, there was a shooting attack that Palestinians carried out in the area. The IDF did not specifically state that the attack in Nablus is a retaliation, however, it is very likely that it was. The IDF reported that Louis Masha, who was a high-ranking wanted Palestinian militant, was killed in that airstrike. Palestinian sources, moments before I recorded this, put out an update stating that another Palestinian was killed in the airstrike. The identity, however, was not published, so I do not know if it is another militant or another civilian at this time. I will update more on that when more news comes out. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel and southern parts of Lebanon, in addition to ongoing attacks between the sides, there was the biggest escalation that happened since the war began in the last 24 hours. Following an IDF attack in Kila village that killed 4 operatives of the Radwan force, that is Hezbollah's commando units, Hezbollah launched a major barrage of over 100 rockets in several waves on Saturday evening. The first wave included 30 rockets, and the second wave included 10 rockets. Then there were several successive barrages that were launched at 6:18 in the evening, local time in the Middle East. As part of these barrages, there was one missile that was not successfully intercepted by the IDF, and it managed to hit a soccer stadium where a youth soccer event was taking place in the northern town of Majd al-Shams in Israel. Israeli authorities have reported that 12 teenagers aged between 10 and 20 were killed in that attack, and 29 more were injured. 6 of them are still considered in critical condition. Seemingly anticipating the expected substantial escalation in Israel's retaliation to this, within an hour of that attack, Hezbollah issued a statement denying responsibility for that fire. The first statement was issued by Hezbollah to Reuters, stating that Hezbollah has nothing to do with any rocket fire in the area. And later in the evening, Hezbollah put out its own statement, stating that the group had nothing to do with the event that occurred in Majd al-Shams specifically. The group did admit that it fired what's called Falk 1 missiles in its barrages. However, it stated that they targeted the IDF Hermon division base in that area. Majd al-Shams is beneath Mount Hermon, however, that they did not attack Majd al-Shams. The IDF issued a statement in response confirming that the missile that landed in Majd al-Shams in that soccer stadium is an Iranian-made Falk 1 missile, and stating that only Hezbollah possesses these in Lebanon. I will say, just in a moment of clarification, the Falk 1 missile is a medium-range missile, and it packs a warhead of 50 kilos of explosives, and just to give some context, the basic Qassam rockets that Hamas fires pack a warhead of roughly 5.5 kilos of explosives. So the Falk missile is 10 times more powerful than the basic Qassam rockets. The IDF also stated that intelligence confirms that Hezbollah is responsible for firing that rocket, going out of its way to also name Ali Muhammad Yahya, the Hezbollah field commander in charge of the Shaba region, as the operative who was in charge of the firing of that missile. The IDF also published maps stating that this is the trajectory of that missile, and again reconfirming that the IDF is certain through intelligence and through the forensic evidence that Hezbollah is responsible for the launching of this missile that killed, as I stated, 12 teenagers. What further complicates the situation for Hezbollah is that Majd al-Shams is a Druze city in northern Israel, and while many of its inhabitants serve in the IDF, many others still maintain kinship with the Druze population in Lebanon and Syria. So this event is, quote-unquote, very embarrassing for Hezbollah. Many sources within Lebanon and Syria condemned the attack, however virtually none of them called out Hezbollah as the instigator. In Lebanon, the government also condemned the attack and called for a complete end of hostilities, adding, and I quote, "Attacking civilians is a blatant violation of international law and contradicts the principles of humanity." While their statement did not name Hezbollah specifically, the Speaker of the House in Lebanon, Nabih Berri, did say that Lebanon is completely committed to UN Security Council Resolution 1701, and it's important to note that that resolution includes Hezbollah withdrawing from southern Lebanon. Regarding Israel's expected retaliation, which many fear could spiral into an all-out war, Sky News in Arabic quoted Israeli sources later in the evening, stated that the retaliation will be severe, however will, quote-unquote, not break the bank and lead to full-scale war. Hours later, reports came out of substantial airstrikes that were carried out in eastern regions of Baalbek, some 90 kilometers north of the border in Lebanon, specifically in the Bekaa Valley and in the areas of Tariya. There were also reports of substantial attacks that took place in Sor. The IDF later put out a statement stating that it carried out a major offensive in Lebanon, targeting 7 different sites simultaneously. I will add in a moment of analysis that while it is very, very likely there's going to be a major IDF retaliation, it is also likely that the main focus of the retaliation will only begin within 24 to 48 hours, due in part to the fact that Prime Minister Netanyahu is currently in the United States and is traveling back to Israel and is only going to arrive in Israel on Sunday morning. Only then is the cabinet going to be convened, so it is very likely that we will see a quote-unquote high-profile retaliation, either massive escalation of airstrikes or specifically targeted assassinations. However, we're likely only going to see that coming into Sunday, Monday. Obviously, I'll report more about that when it comes out. Those are my highlights from the last 24 hours. If you find these reports informative, please do remember to hit that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications if you know when reports come out. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.